Another key distinction to consider is funding and resources, where the money or the food or whatever resources that an agency or an organization has available, where does it come from? What are the terms and conditions by which they receive that funding or those resources? How are they accountable? Who are they accountable to? These are all important questions to ask yourself as you look at who's who and who does what in this line of work. So government agencies, first off, typically have resources that they provide directly, that is through their bilateral institutions. In the case of the US, that would be through USAID, or they give to organizations such as the multilateral agencies, such as the UN World Food Program, for programming abroad. It could be through food aid, like in the case of food aid agencies. It can be cash aid. It can be cash aid in the sense of technical support, technical assistance, training, and simply cash given to various governments or various organizations for the particular programs that they have in mind. And of course, all of the resources that we're talking about coming from governments, by definition, are coming from money that the government's raised. And in every case, this is taxpayers' money. And taxpayers' money is by far the largest source of all resources used in international development programs, in international relief aid, anything of that type. The largest and largest, biggest programs overall are always going to be taxpayers' money. NGOs, on the other hand, are mainly funded through private resources, meaning that they are raising money locally from particular donors that they may know, individual foundations, different in every case. Their focus is on fundraising oftentimes. They will then also have government funding. Many of the large NGOs that I mentioned earlier who are big in advocacy and operations, both like CARE, World Vision, Save the Children, Mercy Corps, they also have a significant amount of their operational funding that comes from bilateral sources, in this case the US government. And in many cases, the US government will decide how much of the resources they want to allocate for a particular program and divide it between the UN agencies involved and the NGOs involved. And one criteria that they will use is to see how well we're working together and how our comparative advantage is being best used in that particular situation. One key area that's very important to keep in mind is, for all of these organizations in terms of their fundraising, is how accountable are they and how they spend their money. For all of us, a number one concern is how much of the funds raised are actually used for programs. And this is just an example from the Save the Children Fund, which is one of our NGOs that we work very, very closely with around the world. They're based in Westport, Connecticut. This is from their website. And this is very typical that organizations such as Save the Children, this information would be very prominent on their website. This is the amount of money. This is, I should say, the percentage of their expenditures they're saying is 90%. And that they spend 6% on fundraising and 4% on management and general costs. These are questions always to ask, and these are questions many people raise when they are thinking of contributing to a particular charity, a particular program that has a particular mandate or values that person feels are important in that. You always need to be looking at how much of the dollar that you're contributing is actually going to be spent for that purpose that they're raising the money for. And to be fair, the smaller organizations, of course, will have higher management fees, management costs. They have to pay their staff. They have to be able to cover their overheads. Some of the larger organizations, of course, with economies of scale, can have lower figures. So, for example, in the case of the UN World Food Program, the agency that I work for, our figure for administrative overhead is about 7%, which is one of the lowest overall. But again, to be fair, that's because we're also very, very large, and we're able to enjoy many economies of scale that other agencies that are smaller may not. So then let's move on to international bilateral agencies. So this is government now. We're still talking about government as opposed to non-government organizations. All first world countries, that is, well-developed countries in the world today, have some type of what you would call a bilateral development agency. So, for example, in the U.S., I think many of you are aware, it would be USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which today is closely connected with the U.S. State Department, but it is part of the executive branch of the U.S. government based in Washington, D.C., with missions around the world, implementing U.S. government development programs, humanitarian response, overseeing but also monitoring U.S. foreign aid that is pledged to other agencies, to NGOs, to the UN. CIDA is the Canadian equivalent, the Canadian International Development Agency based in Ottawa, very much the same approach that I explained for USAID. DFID is the British government's agency for development. JICA for Japan. The European Union has a number of different agencies. They're split between the emergency side and the development side that they support, and AusAid in the case of Australia. And again, we then look at resources and funding from a bilateral point of view and how these organizations work. Food aid in cash typically, but food aid in particular, has typically come from the traditionally food surplus countries in the world. Back when the World Food Program was founded, for example, back in the 60s, there was a group, maybe you could count on one or two hands maximum, of the key major food producer countries in the world that had surpluses. The US, Canada, Australia, Europe. There are a number of new players now where it comes to food aid in particular, where we have a whole list of new donors that have become heavily involved, providing cash to the World Food Program for local purchase. The DFID, the UK government, JICA, the Japanese government, Saudi Arabia. This will be cash for local and regional purchase.